Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to Marketing Adventure with Jackie. Today we're going to round off the discussion of the elements of design by covering 4 and actually 5 elements. And the reason why we're doing all of these in one is because these all don't have a large amount of content to them, but they are very key as a part of the whole element of design. So come on into the room and let's talk about it. You're listening to Marketing Adventure, the hub for business, fashion, marketing, and other CTE educators who integrate marketing into the learning experience. I'm your host, Jackie Walker. Each week, I'll cover marketing education concepts, strategies, tips, trends, frameworks, and other information to equip you to connect your classroom to digital natives while cultivating an engaged learning environment. So come on into the room where your favorite beverage, snacks, and even your cell phone are all welcome. As I talk about these elements, I want you to keep fashion marketing in mind. And remember, fashion marketing can be in the form of writing, reviews, newsletters, journals. It can be in the form of a stylist, hands-on. It can be in the form of visual merchandising, signage, all of these things and more. You will be able to use these elements of design. So space. When we look at what space means as an element of design, it refers to the area that is around, above, below, behind an object. Every shape and form has a place in space. Now, space like color is an element that doesn't have to be used, but when it is used, it's a powerful way to add emphasis to your design. When we're looking at space, it can be positive space or negative space. It can be open or closed. It can be shallow or deep. It can be two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So let me talk about those a little bit. In a two-dimensional setting, space can create shadows, shading, overlap, sizing. All of those can help design an object's place in space. An example of using an object in space and using shadow or depth on the object to create two-dimensional view of the object in space is, let's say, a button on a picture, a button on a computer, or whatever the button is being used for. So, example, the button, if you put a shadow on it, it makes the button appear closer to the user than if it did not have the shadow. It would just be flat with no dimension to it, and it wouldn't appear as an object that is raised and closer to you if it did not have the shadow. And the shadow also helps to create depth. So with space, objects that are placed in space can be made to appear closer, further away, or a variety of things, just depending on how you use those other little elements, such as shadow, overlapping, shading, and so much more. To sum up space, it's about creating an illusion of a three-dimensional object on a flat surface. So we may see that in the fashion marketing realm more with copy, with signage, with visual merchandising, things where you will have an object that you want to be the focal point of the marketing that you're communicating, but then you have to determine how that object will be fit into space and how things that you do around that object will help illuminate the message or the object that you're using to create a message for your marketing. The next element is form. Now, form is three-dimensional. Form comes in two types. It's either going to be geometric, which is man-made, or natural forms, which are organic. An example of geometric forms would be those that are created by using tools such as rulers, a compass, or digital tools. Those are your shapes, your geometric objects such as boxes or triangles or circles, or a variety of shapes that you can use by using tools. Now, an example of your organic form is going to be those things that are created in nature, such as flowers, trees, mountains, different things of that nature, or something that is actually drawn by hand. Those are organic. They weren't created by any type of tool. They formed naturally without any interruption in their formation. And you can measure form by using the height times the width times the depth to get the size of the form. That is digitally or actually physically. And also, form can be created by using other elements of designs such as shape. And you can also add color and texture to form. The one thing to remember about form is that everything possesses form in one way or another. The third element of design that we're talking about today is a two-in-one package. It is value and tone. And this is a simple element that doesn't require a lot of information. It just really reflects the lightness and darkness of a color. And that lightness and darkness can be changed by adding white, gray, or black to the color. If you should decide to play around with color, you'll start off with the true color. Let's take red, for example. You would start off with red as a primary color. So there's no colors that you use to make red. It's just red. It's one of the elements of design that we discussed in episode 35 when we kicked off this series of the elements of design. So if we look at red, which is a pure color, and again, I said you can change the value of a color by adding white, gray, or black to it. So when you add white to red, it's going to change the color to pink. And that is going to be a tint of the color red. And there's depending on how much white you add to it, will determine the actual color that it is changing, the intensity of the color. So when you add black to red, then it's going to move towards a darker color like maroon, which adding black creates it as a shade. And just think about shade. Shade is always darker than the object in which the shade is for or created from. So if you were to add gray, you're going to have a more muted color, which is going to be a tone. So using value and tone in color just makes it go from, it creates different intensities of the color to suit the purposes of the design in which you're creating. And that is value in a nutshell. Alrighty, so we've come to our last element of design for today, and that is type. And when I'm mentioning the word type, I am talking about letters, fonts, or characters that are used in your design. It's also known as typography, which is the more formal word of type. Type is an element that is used as a part of visual communication, and it's really a fundamental part of any design that it is used in. It can be used for text to read, or as a part of a shape, or as simply a visual element. It helps to convey emotion or a mood, and this is basically based on the types of font that is used. As you know, the types of font that are out there are very vast. There are simple conservative type font that's used when creating copy to read in a journal for a social media post or things that we're going to actually be reading. That kind of type has to be very conservative, because if we're using the curly types or fonts, it's hard to read. So we want to be as conservative as possible when we're creating something that you want a user to read, especially if it's like in a presentation that's going to be projected onto a screen. I've learned from my many years when I was in project management and was overseeing the development of our annual conference for our executives. We had to make sure that the font was like Arial, which is very conservative. It doesn't have any dots at the end of the lines. It doesn't have any little curly parts on the line or anything. It had to be very conservative so that it did not create or distract from the content that was being used in the PowerPoint. And there's something for you to use as you're creating presentations, or having your students to create presentations for class, is to introduce them to the concept of using conservative font for slideshows, for the viewers, for better viewing, for the audience. Okay. And then if you're getting into more creative type fonts, then those are used to evoke a certain type of emotion for the person who's actually looking at it. If you see some websites or social media posts that have like the curly letters, it makes you feel maybe like more girly and soft. If you see font that is bold and maybe it has a shadow behind it, it's loud. It wants to grab your attention and it's making a statement. So type is used to create those emotions or feelings, because they want to convey a certain type of message by the type that is being used. So when you're actually creating copy for, let's say, your website or even social media or a blog or a review, something that you're writing up, you want to stick to a certain type of font that would be a part of your brand, part of your copy, so that so your readers or your audience will always know this is Jackie, because this is what I recognize, that font. I recognize that type. This is in line with her branding. So when you have a website, it's suggested that you stick to two or three of type faces for as a part of your design. And this is so that it really creates an easy, smooth read for the reader. If you have too much contrasting type, this can be distracting to the reader and it could make them move away from your content rather than to continue to read it. As we close out this discussion about type, here are some questions to consider when you are looking at type. So, is the typeface that I'm using appropriate for my audience? Is it in keeping with the message that I'm communicating? The next question would be, if I'm using more than one typeface, are they contrasting or conflicting? How well do they work together? And that's something really to consider, because sometimes I know when I use type on my own personal website, I generally stick with one particular type. And if I do use another, it may be to just add like a little flair to what I'm writing. And it probably would be in a title, not necessarily be a part of the body of the context in which I'm writing. So then I develop this style where my title may be bold, or my title maybe have a little bit of cutesy type to it, and my content is still in a conservative typeface so that it is easily readable by my audience. And then another question to consider is the size right for the medium in which I'm producing and the message that I'm producing? So I run across this, and I've thought about this just as recently as today, about when I am going into my email and I'm reading messages from businesses or creators or whoever is sending me an email. And I come across all sizes of font that is being used for the message of the email. And I'm looking at it on my phone. And this is something that you should consider if you're a creator and you're out here sending emails. What is the size of the type that I'm using? Because there are some messages that come across and the font is large enough where it's easily readable, and I can skim through that message pretty easily and no issue at all. Then there are some emails that when I pull that email up, I need a magnifying glass to read the font or the words that are on the screen, or I have to enlarge it and be able to read it. Then I have to scroll, move my screen over, move it back over, shift it back and forth, side to side to read the whole message. That is so discouraging to me as a reader. And a lot of times, especially if this person is sending multiple emails because they're promoting something, I don't read those emails. I actually end up unsubscribing to that person or that company because they the text is so small and they have a lot of information that they put into that email. I'm like, I don't want to be bothered. And so when you're using a typeface for your email or for any content that you're producing, you have to consider the medium that message is going out through. And we know when we send an email, a person can read an email from their phone, from their tablet, or from their computer, and it's going to look a little bit different. And that's why the creators or whatever email company you're using will give you an opportunity to preview that message in each one of those mediums so that you can see how your viewer is going to see that message. And I highly encourage, if you're using something like that, or you sending out a message, that you look to see how it's going to appear. Even send a message to yourself so that you can see it from the perspective of the end user. So that's one of the questions. That's a very good question to ask yourself when you're using type. How is it going to be conveyed in the medium that I'm using, and with the message that I'm sending? So, and then you want to ask yourself, am I using a typeface that is timeless and classic? Or will this be, phased out, something that won't, is trendy, that it won't be around for a while. So it's something that you may want to consider, especially if you are putting out something that is going to be evergreen, that will always be available for people to see. Then you may want to use a typeface that's going to be something that that has staying power, that is classic, easy to read, and doesn't date your material by the trendy font that you're using. As I wrap up this discussion about the elements of design, I just want to go through those elements of design over this 5-part series. We have covered 8 elements of design. They are color, texture, shape, line, form, value and tone, space, and type. All right. I hope this has been very educational for you and will allow you to use this in your classroom with your students. I do thank you for joining me here at Marketing Adventure with Jackie, and stay tuned for next week's episode as we begin our series on the principles of design. Have a wonderfully blessed day. Thanks for listening to Marketing Adventure. Remember to subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode with someone you think would benefit from the information shared here today. If you have any questions or want to connect with me, find me on Instagram at Marketing Adventure. All links and resources discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes at marketingadventure.com.